Ladies and gentlemen, the Football Scoop podcast is back. I am Scott Russell, our college football experts, John Bryce, Zach Barnett. I got Doug Samuels back. Doug, it's good to see you, young man. That's all we're going to say. Good to see you. Okay. Week 9 was an interesting week in college football. An interesting week. USC, I feel like they lost even though they won. We're going to have to spend some time there at some point. But, gentlemen, I'd like to do a quick recap of Week 9 games. I'd like to have us look forward. Tomorrow, Tuesday, they're doing the first release of the CFP projections, rankings, whatever you might call them. Let's talk about that. Let's start at the top. Let's go top 25. Big kudos to ESPN. I don't always do this, but when ESPN deserves kudos, they deserve kudos. If you look at the Week 9 top 25 games, they include James Madison at the end. Well done, whoever the programmer is at ESPN that made that change. Good job, young man or lady. Georgia handled Florida. What do we need to say about that one, gentlemen?
I just think that now Georgia's two biggest tests against Kentucky and Florida, the Bulldogs have really evinced their power and played their two most complete games. That 43-20 final score is pretty misleading. Florida got up 7-0, and then Georgia ran away with it after that. And just a systematic domination. Florida had some really boneheaded plays, a particular fourth down play that was absolutely an abject failure. But this is a Georgia team without Brock Bowers, mind you, that flat out dominated the Gators.
John, I'd like to ask you, because I think you've been the highest on Missouri all season. Missouri and Georgia battle this upcoming weekend. And Missouri has been very good all season. They They were in a dogfight with LSU at Missouri, and LSU had more offensive firepower that day. How do you see Georgia and Missouri matching up this upcoming weekend?
The one thing none of us has seen Georgia have to do this year is really play from behind whatsoever, other than a random score here or there, like Florida taking an early 7-0 lead. We don't yet know, in my opinion, quite how Georgia would react if Brady cooks hot and gets Missouri out to a 2-touchdown lead, whether that's a 14-0 or 21-7 in the first half. Does Georgia feel the pressure at that point, or does Georgia simply settle in and dominate? I still think that Georgia will be far too physically overpowering on both sides of the football for Missouri. But if Missouri doesn't offensively give Georgia its best test thus far, I would also be surprised.
Yeah, Georgia's been an incredibly slow starting team this season, outside of the Kentucky game. Even JB mentioned they fell down 7-0 before scoring 36 straight. So if I'm Eli Drinkwitz, my plan to win this game is absolutely we got to get up not one but 2 touchdowns and put Georgia in a position that they really haven't been this year. Certainly haven't been without Brock Bowers. And then obviously, even if you get up 14-0, you got to withstand 80 plays against their offense, 80 plays or so against their defense, and withstand that. But Missouri's formula to win has got to be a big early lead.
Georgia's defense is significantly better than LSU's defense. And I don't know. I'm tempted to take Missouri plus the points because it's a boatload of points. I think it's like 17 points. But I think Georgia wins the game. Anyway, moving right along. Ohio State, Wisconsin. Thoughts on Ohio State?
Not a vintage Ohio State team. It's almost a Jim Tressel Ohio State team where they're totally comfortable winning games 24-10. And you wonder what Ohio State would look like if someone was able to bottle up Marvin Harrison Jr., but it doesn't seem like there's a team that's capable of doing that. So that's kind of a moot question. But the Jim Knowles defense is arguably the best unit in the country. And so when you can take that with you week to week, especially on the road, it makes you really hard to beat. And, previewing what we'll talk about later, I think this is the number 1 team in the country right now in terms of resume.
Yeah. Go ahead, Doug. I apologize.
No, I mean, I don't know. I agree with that one. I think they're masking some quarterback issues with Marvin Harrison, and when Travion Henderson is healthy, that's really helped them along. Defensively, I don't think they've peaked yet. I think they've got a lot of good defensive football to play, and I think year 3 under Jim Knowles' defense may be, and I don't know what they're returning, but I think that's when they kind of hit their stride. But I don't think they're the best team in the country. I think the next few weeks and really that end of season matchup with Michigan is going to tell us everything we need to know about Ohio State. I could see them going into that game and just getting the door. I don't want to say the doors blown off, but it could be a 10-point game or something like that with Michigan winning. I think Ohio State. I don't want to call them a pretender right now, but I think they've got a lot of question marks. That if you, like you said, if you take away Marvin Harrison Jr., Travion Henderson isn't healthy, you've got some major concerns on offense.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think this is the most vulnerable Ohio State team of the last several years. Not just the most vulnerable since Ryan Day took over, but in a lot of ways even more vulnerable than the last couple that Urban Meyer had. I think this time a year ago, we sort of had some clearly defined guys that, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, as coordinators that I think had separated themselves from other people in college football, certainly Garrett Riley among them. I think this is in a lot of ways the year of the defensive coordinator, and specifically Jim Knowles there at Ohio State. I think Al Golden has had a career renaissance here at Notre Dame. Those are two guys that I would expect to factor heavily into the Broyles Award. Now, offensively, Will Stein at Oregon, the coordinator out there, I think he deserves a little more attention than he's getting. Had Colorado not fizzled, I think we'd hear more about the job that Sean Lewis is doing out there for the Buffaloes, and he's doing a really good job. But yes, this is a vulnerable Ohio State team, and I think this is in a lot of ways the year of the defensive coordinator in college football.
On the offensive side, we got a lot to talk about. How about Florida State just steamrolling people? I mean, they beat Wake in a mean way, and Florida State's schedule going forward ain't much. And I think they got Miami and they got Florida at the end. I'm not sure what else they got, but it ain't much.
Yeah, I think they're a team that needs to go undefeated to make the playoff. The win over LSU has aged very well, although they'll probably take their third loss this weekend. But that's going to be their best win. North Carolina's fallen off. The ACC is just an average conference, and so I think they're really going to have to be undefeated come Selection Sunday, or they'll be a pretty easy cut, even though they are a really, really good football team.
ACC is one of those leagues that it seems like every year for maybe the past decade, they've got like one elite team and then everyone else. And this year that happens to be Florida State.
Florida State and Clemson have just switched spots.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another inexplicable loss over the weekend, really, for North Carolina. And to your point, Scott, FSU has a road game this week at Pitt, and then a game against North Alabama, sandwiched in between the Sunshine State battles against Miami and Florida. So there is no margin for error, though. I don't think Florida State could stumble against one of these ACC foes or Florida and then win the ACC title and still be okay for the CFP. I completely agree. Their margin for error is absolutely zero, particularly as there are so many one-loss teams sort of clustering behind them, and you still have Ohio State, Michigan undefeated, Georgia undefeated, Washington undefeated, and all of those.
Well, you guys talk about ACC being an average league, but you guys have been hyping the Pac-12, and okay, but Washington, Oregon played a battle, okay, but Washington now looks like Utah was going to be good, and Oregon donkey konged them. Utah might come back and get somebody. Are they elite in the conference, or is it average? I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. Washington beat Stanford. I wasn't excited by that one. Washington's about to play USC. I think Washington USC's over-under is almost 80. Texas plays Kansas State. Texas and Kansas State have both been putting up like 40 numbers. And the over-under in that game is like 50. It's just what I'm saying is USC and Washington, the defense, not really excited by the.
Yeah, Washington has fallen off a cliff since the Oregon game. They're very fortunate to beat Arizona State at home. Extremely fortunate to not be trying to defend a game-winning field goal against Stanford. That 4th and 2 that they had. Troy Taylor's squad had perfectly schemed up. All the young man has to do is just catch the football and go to the ground. So yeah, they look like a team begging for someone to beat them. USC's begging for someone to put them out of their misery as well. But it's interesting because coming away from that Oregon-Washington game, a lot of people are like, well, Washington won the game, but I think Oregon's the better team. And Oregon has just beat the brakes off of a really good Utah team. They've been really, really good, and they're properly rated as the highest one-loss team right now. Just one spot below Washington. And, I mean, I think most of us would take Oregon in a rematch right now.
Agreed. Kansas, Oklahoma, because we're all fools, we all picked Oklahoma to win that game. Lance Leipold just dug in and got it done. The man can coach. It's fun. We all know that. Why we all picked Oklahoma, I don't know. But golly, Kansas was fun to watch in that game.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine a better coaching. There's a lot of great coaching staffs out there, but Kansas is certainly at the top of the list. Doing that, molding their offense around what Jason Bean can do with his track star speed. They hit enough downfield passes, and they totally, shut down Oklahoma's vertical passing game. It was interesting. Kansas jumped out to that early lead, and then they had that hour lightning delay. And the debate at the time was, who's this going to favor? And it seemed like it was going to favor Oklahoma just because Kansas, it looked like they were on skates in the run game defensively. But Oklahoma couldn't or refused to throw the ball downfield. And eventually Kansas had just enough to stop Oklahoma and kept plugging away. And it was a fun to see Lance Leipold celebrate with his family after that win.
And Oklahoma had 3 turnovers in that game. And as good as this Oklahoma team has played, it does not remotely have the capacity to overcome that kind of performance on a road with a team that is well coached and that has laid everything on the line the way that the Kansas Jayhawks did.
Yeah, and similar to that Washington-Oregon game where Oklahoma comes out of a 50-50 game with Texas, they looked like Washington. I mean, they've been begging to get beat against UCF, very easily could have gone to overtime, and then now they got to go on the road against a rapidly improving Oklahoma State team.
I think the thing that doesn't get talked about enough with Lance Leipold, and I could talk, no pun intended, but until I'm blue in the face about scheme stuff and their shifts and motions and option and RPO stuff that they do on offense, it's awesome. But for Kansas to take the field and play with the confidence and swagger that they do against an Oklahoma squad that has all the tradition and swagger you could imagine, like that is more impressive to me than anything else that they're doing. Like that, the kids on that roster play like they expect to win every game, and Kansas may be the hardest job in the country to build that. And I think that speaks volumes about what Lance Leipold has done.
There was a clip I shared on Twitter from Kansas football, and it was all their players on the field just sharing what was on their heart. And they're like, this is what we expected. This was the expectation. We ain't done. This is why we came here to play for Coach Leipold. It was awesome. I enjoyed that greatly. All right, let's talk about Texas for a second, Zach. Texas handled BYU. I really don't want to talk about that. I mean, unless you want to. Going forward, they got a big game against K-State, and then their schedule. They could get tripped up, but there's nothing else that scares you on their schedule. They lost to Oklahoma. Did they handle K-State? How's that one play out? How does that impact the rest of Texas's future?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a must-win game for their playoff hopes, and I mean, there's a log jam at the top, and you could be, looking up at K-State and Oklahoma if you don't win. If you don't win this game, so this is very much a semifinal game in a way for both teams. K-State's figured some things out offensively, certainly defensively. They lost their stud middle linebacker Daniel Green in the Missouri game. Hurt them for a little bit, but they've given up 3 points combined in their last 2 games. Texas has been able to move the ball pretty well between the 20s and just cannot seem to punch it in on goal-to-go situations. My one suggestion for Steve Sarkisian, because I know he's listening, is if you're throwing from the 1 yard line, maybe throw the ball into the end zone. Against Oklahoma, they threw short of the goal line, got stuffed. Against BYU, threw short of the goal line, got stuffed. So if you want to maybe just throw the ball past that white line, it might help you. But they scored 35. They need to get better offensively. Malik Murphy, first game, threw some questionable passes. A lot to improve on. It's going to have to be a team win for them. They can't depend on quarterback play to put them over the hump. So they certainly can do it, but they're going to have to go out there and really outplay them from player 1 to player 85.
Don't they have arguably the highest rated quarterback room in the history of college football? That might be hyperbole, but
I mean, in terms of recruiting rankings, they have the 2 number 1 players in basically back-to-back classes. So,
and we're talking about quarterback problems.
Yeah, 4-star. I mean, I wouldn't say they have quarterback. Their bigger problem is the offensive line right now. The offensive line is playing well below their ability.
But I do think that in the course of that game on Saturday, when Texas was plotting out of the gates early, didn't Steve Sarkisian tell the TV broadcast that it's possible we see Arch Manning here in the second quarter? And so I believe Sark made those comments. So it makes you wonder how long is the chain for Malik Murphy to operate things, and what are they maybe seeing in practice that would make Sarkisian say that so early in the game against BYU and in a team that you knew over the course of 4 quarters Texas was going to handle.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a position where you have to play the best player, the player that gives you a chance to win regardless. And certainly the 4-game redshirt rule makes it easier to put Arch in there if the plan is to still redshirt him. But Sark's also been a guy that shows faith in whoever's out there. You know, last year there were times when he probably should have pulled Quinn Ewers from the game and didn't do it, obviously thinking he was going to take his lumps for this year. And so obviously it's a different situation, but Sark shows a lot of trust in whatever guy he's got out there.
All right, let's breeze through some of these a little bit quicker. Some quick thoughts. We already talked about Oregon. We're going to come back to them in the CFP discussion. They handled a very good Utah team at Utah. That was impressive. Penn State handled Indiana. Anything needs to be said on that one?
You look at just real quick. You look at a lot of metrics, computer algorithms, and they have Penn State as like a top 5 team. I think this is a top 15 team.
Yeah, I would completely disagree that Penn State handled Indiana. It absolutely did not. I watched that game actually from the press box in Notre Dame and watched it very intently because Jess is an IU grad. Some of the folks at Notre Dame are IU grads, and Indiana found a way to lose as much as Penn State found a way to win in that game. Now, Drew Aller hit a really long touchdown pass to give Penn State the late go-ahead lead in the game's final moments. And then Indiana's perpetually inept offense was so terrible, it endured a safety on a 1st and 10 play from the 25-yard line. You heard me. It endured a safety on a 1st and 10 play from the 25-yard line. That's how bad Indiana is. That's why it ended up a 9-point margin. But Indiana, which has been really auditioning to be a cadaver in a Halloween movie on offense, had a 14-7 lead in this game for a long time and moved the ball pretty consistently against the Penn State defense that has been the bedrock of that team and that program. So I think the Nittany Lions have some real identity issues. And I saw, even after the Ohio State game, I thought, on the right day, Penn State still Michigan is by all these states. I don't see anything that the state has a chance to beat Michigan.
I'm going to cut JB out there because that was weird. JB, it just wasn't right. I'm going to move us right along. Congratulations, Jed Fish's squad. That's back-to-back weeks over Washington State, Oregon State. Yeah, those are the Pac-2, but those are quality wins for Jed Fish's team that needed some quality wins, and their schedule is not ridiculously brutal away. I think they have 5 wins now. Arizona making some noise out there, which is nice to see.
Yeah, you brought up the Pac-12 earlier, and you were spot on in a lot of your comments, but it's just kind of funny how we evaluate conferences because you got Washington's not playing as good, USC's playing terrible, and then you would have 3 top 10 teams even still with Oregon State. They go on the road to lose. So on the one hand, you could argue, well, how good is the Pac-12? Or you could argue, well, that shows the depth of the Pac-12. Whatever conference you support is whatever argument you're going to make.
I support college football and great humans. Moving right along. Ole Miss handled Vanderbilt. I can't listen to the Vanderbilt is rebuilding stuff. Just come back when you can win some football games. I'm sorry. Notre Dame handled Pitt in a big, big way. North Carolina lost to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's a fascinating team. North Carolina, I don't know what to say about North Carolina, to be honest. Any thoughts there, gentlemen?
Georgia Tech has won all of their even week games, so week 2, 4, 6, and 8. Their last 2 remaining even week games are against Clemson and Georgia. So if they continue that trend, could make for a really interesting end of college football season.
What a nugget!
Yeah,
amen to that. Louisville, Jeff Brom's a ball coach. The guy just is. Obviously, Duke is a different team once that injury happened to Riley Leonard, but Louisville's got 1 loss. I mean, kudos to them because Satterfield wasn't on that. It just wasn't on that trajectory. And Brom comes home, and all of a sudden, with those pieces, he's making it work.
Yeah, you got to feel great about the future of Louisville football.
And it's to Pitt. That was a nice little insertion. Just that happened.
Yep.
Inexplainable. That's why you love college football. Air Force continues to be undefeated, and it's fun to say that.
Yeah, I think I'm at the point where I'm flat out rooting for them to win out because it would be great to see a Service Academy make one of those big bowl games. That would be fantastic.
Yes. Vols and the refs beat Kentucky.
The Vols and Jerry Mack's running game beat Kentucky. For my overall dismissals of some of the work being done by offensive coordinators across college football this year, there are some guys emerging as really quality running backs coaches and doing a good job of managing multiple running backs. And Jerry Mack is right at the top of that list. And they've got multiple guys, I think, averaging 5 yards per carry. Everybody thinks about Josh Heupel's offense being this frenetic tempo that chucks it around all over the place. And as we've heard some detractors say, their receivers don't even run routes. They just run around and get open. Well, that's not at all the case this year. Joe Milton has had a couple of sensational highlight throws. He has not at all been remotely consistent, particularly in his passing beyond 8 yards downfield. But along the way, the Sampson kid, Jalen Wright, Jabari Small, they're all carrying the Tennessee offense and the Tennessee ground attack. And Kentucky's bad. Kentucky has been overhyped. I've said it. The stat I had and tweeted out Saturday night, Mark Stoops, for all the good work that he's done, and he's made Kentucky a very mid-pack SEC stable program. He's 6-29 all time against Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee. He's never beaten Georgia. He has 2 wins against Tennessee. And a lot of that time, Tennessee has been wandering aimlessly through a Derek Dooley, Butch Jones, Jeremy Pruitt desert. Bless you, sir.
Couldn't quite get to the mute button in time.
I don't think it's fair to say Kentucky's bad.
They're very middling.
Well, yeah, they're also in the great state of Kentucky, which doesn't produce a lot of high school football athletes.
Louisville.
And what does get produced to that point though is getting ready to be at Louisville, because Louisville has wholly embraced NIL in basketball and at football. Jeff Brom has a great juice around that program, and they're playing really exciting football, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. Kentucky does not play exciting football. Kentucky has done, I can't say enough good about the staff at Kentucky for what they've done developing players. But they've also subsisted off of basically being de facto MAC East champs most years with their non-conference schedule.
Oh, I couldn't disagree with you more. No, I think Kentucky's
they played in non-conference. They don't play anybody.
Kentucky's lost their last 3 games, I believe, to Georgia, Missouri, and the referee, the officials, whatever. Anyway, got to cut Mark Stoops some slack there. Anyway, we're moving right along because we're 25 minutes into this thing. Willie Fritz just continues to pile up wins, kind of like Lance Leipold, Chris Klieman. This whole Kansas thing is percolating in college football. It's fascinating. Great job, Willie Fritz. Tulane continues to build. UCLA, Colorado. Do we need to talk about that winning? Are we obligated contractually? No, don't have to. Good. Okay, so USC lost. I guess they got a W somehow, but they really lost. I mean, you can't lose or come that close to losing to Cal. It's completely unacceptable. I thought if they actually lost, I think you've shut the program down for 2 years or something like that. But I mean, what has happened to USC football?
For context, let's make this clear. USC trailed by 2 touchdowns entering the fourth quarter to a team who couldn't control its own field to start the game on time because students formed a kumbaya circle at midfield and tried to demand the reinstatement of colonial studies professor. That's who USC almost just lost to and
Those
should have
students
lost.
went and scored on USC's defense.
Say that again.
I said those students then went and scored on USC's defense.
Well, yeah, they found as much open room as all of USC's opponents, and that's how they were able to get to midfield and delay the start of the game.
I mean, Lincoln Riley. I think Lincoln Riley. The expectation was, whoa, if this is the worst team he's ever going to have at USC, talking about last year, then look out. And I think this year's team has long been Caleb Williams just creating magic, and they've lived off that through the first half of the season. Lincoln's going to have to do a rip it down to the studs, evaluate every single thing, including himself as the play caller and being so focused on the offense and quarterbacks, because it looks like they don't appear to be elite at all in defense, in strength. Recruiting's not going the way that they thought it would. He needs a total evaluation as soon as their season ends, because they're not going to be in the Pac-12 championship game. So late November, he needs to reevaluate every single thing about his program.
So, yeah, when the former USC defensive players are calling out the current USC defense and the defensive staff, that's bad. So what would be comical, right? So they got Washington. Washington is a different team. If this turns into a shootout and USC, Caleb Williams makes a play and USC winds up winning, that would be the ultimate Pac-12, right? Mm-hmm. USC beating Washington and something like this.
But USC, you've got Oregon still ahead of you, who could beat you by 50, and I don't think any of us would be totally surprised. Yeah, UCLA team that's really tough, plays good defense. So there could be 3 more losses ahead of the Trojans.
Well, and okay, so here's what I want to ask, just because I've started seeing it floating around out there on the platform formerly known as Twitter. We'll go with X. What happens if they lose one more game and there's not even a New Year's Six bowl out there? Does Caleb Williams shut it down? That's a question that is very much percolating out there. I think I've even seen it from some former NFL quarterbacks on social media positing that Caleb Williams might need or might be encroaching upon time to shut it down. How badly do things get for USC if that becomes the case?
I mean, I don't think that should happen. I think it'd be a shame. For as far as I've known, Caleb Williams hasn't given any indications that he will do that. And of course, that wouldn't stop him from doing that. But if it does, then I think we get a look at Malachi Nelson, who's been the heir apparent there for a while. And from everything I've heard, they don't think he's that good. So it would be a shame to see that happen. But seriously, there's been whispers for a while that they don't like Malachi Nelson. Maybe I'm hearing the wrong things, but I'd love to see Malachi Nelson play.
I mean, he's right behind a generational quarterback, like the best quarterback since Andrew Luck. So it's hard to hold a candle to that one as a backup.
Yeah, it's like every time I talk after Doug on these podcasts, I'm toast. I can't feel that shadow.
Generational guy. So James Madison with a nice win over Old Dominion. JMU's got at Georgia State this week. That's a tough game. Georgia State's good. Then they got UConn. They got at App. At App is a weird trap game, right? App's 4-4 right now, but they can shock you. They could not be very good. I don't know. And they close out. I'm sorry. That game is not at App. It's at James Madison. Then they close out at Coastal Carolina. Coastal's down. Still a very fine football team, good enough, could shock you, but they're not going to scare you. It's very, very possible James Madison finishes undefeated and is kind of left with nothing.
Yeah, I actually, corresponded with James Madison's spokesman who confirmed to me that they are not currently eligible to compete in the Sun Belt Championship game. They could very well get into a largely meaningless bowl game, although it wouldn't be meaningless for them to play in it. But it's just such a dumb system that the NCAA controls because the bowls and the conferences are the ones that slot the teams, but the NCAA is the one saying, no, you can't play. It makes no sense.
And the NCAA is trying to make it tougher, which I understand, because it's enabled or allowed too many FCS teams to make the FCS to FBS jump in recent years. But within that, this is trying to apply a blanket approach to everything that you're doing, because JMU has been the model of what you want for a team making the FCS to FBS jump. Not just because of what it's done on the field, but because of how packed its stands are every week, because of the resources devoted to that program, and because of the way that fan base travels to other games. So this is just such a myopic approach, and frankly, just a really stupid, unfair approach.
The NCAA has a lot of really dumb rules, and thinking back to the before training table stuff, like you could have bagels, but you couldn't have cream cheese, and then not allowing an undefeated team into a bowl game. Those are the top two dumbest rules in NCAA history.
Particularly when they talk about not penalizing the student athletes for things beyond their control. Hello?
Agreed.
Amen. All right. We're 31 minutes deep, so we're going to transition. Let's talk real briefly. Yeah, tomorrow the first playoff rankings come out. I think there's obviously a lot of season to go. I think there's a couple of L's to come for some teams that look pretty good right now. I think this thing could get wild. So let's start at the top. And I don't think we need 30 minutes on each of these. Georgia, do they have a loss still to come? And where does Georgia go if they lose in the regular season? If they lose in the SEC championship, I think they're there. But regular season.
Regular season, if they lose, it's not going to matter because they can atone for that in an SEC championship game. Georgia's fine as long as it does not stub its toe twice. I would contend that the top four should probably be Georgia, Ohio State, Florida State, and then Michigan. I just still don't look at Michigan's schedule and have much regard for what the Wolverines have done thus far. I think Michigan is a really complete team with or without somebody else's signals, but I would have them fourth.
All right, so you bring up the interesting point that we knew we'd get to. Ohio State and Michigan play, and then see what happens thereafter, but can both get in, should both get in. Obviously, we don't know what happens that game.
Michigan's schedule's putrid. Obviously, they still have Penn State and Ohio State to go. Everything else is just complete dog water. They should have to be undefeated to make the playoff. I don't care how bad you beat Minnesota and Nebraska. You should have to be undefeated against that schedule to get in.
I don't think there's ever been a better year, and I've said this before on our podcast. It starts next year. The 12-team playoff, if it's launched this year, would do wonders for college football and would do wonders for the 12-team playoff format, because this is the poster child season for a 12-team playoff, because you're going to end up with very likely so many one-loss teams with an argument of some merit that they should be a playoff team, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, Ohio State went to JB's background and won a game. So that's going to – I think they would have a much greater argument as a one-loss team to get into Michigan.
There's a scenario, right, where Michigan or Ohio State has one loss, doesn't make the Big Ten championship, right, this year.
Yep.
You have Washington and Oregon. There's a scenario where one of those finishes with one loss. Alabama could finish with one loss. What happens if that happens?
Well, if Alabama finishes with one,
amongst the one losers.
Well, if Alabama finishes with one loss only, then that means Alabama is going to be the SEC champion, and Alabama would be in the college football playoff at that point. So that's what I think would happen if Alabama is a one-loss team.
Talking about
if they beat Georgia, in the championship.
Talking through the Pac-12 situation, like if Washington and Oregon both have one loss, this is a situation where I think it's good that a computer isn't picking at the end of the season, and it's a group of human beings, because when it comes to the eye test, there's one team that is playing significantly better than the other in that situation. And I don't, you could make an argument that Oregon's playing, top 2 football in college football at this point, the way that they've kind of recovered after their stumble. So to me, Oregon would get in that situation over Washington.
Okay, I agree. If Oregon wins the rematch, they're in for sure. Let me throw a situation at y'all. Washington, undefeated.
Right.
Michigan or Ohio State. Let's just say Michigan, undefeated. Florida State, undefeated. Then your 2 one-loss teams are Texas and Alabama. Who's left out?
Well, so hang on. In that scenario, you said Alabama's 1 loss. That means they beat Georgia, so Georgia has 1 loss also.
Yeah, you can throw them in as well.
That's the problem for everybody, right? Because it's going to be hard to kick Georgia out, given their history. Kick them outside the 4, even if they have that 1 loss. If that 1 loss is in the SEC championship game, if they lose in the regular season and win the SEC championship, Georgia's in. But if they lose in the SEC championship game, that becomes a problem for everybody else, because then you might have 2 SEC teams again.
Yeah, but in that, I think Georgia would be out for sure, and I think Alabama would be out.
You think you think two 1-loss SEC teams and nobody gets into the playoff?
Okay,
sorry, Zach.
Florida State. So who are you? Okay. Who are you kicking out? You got Georgia and Alabama are both have 1 loss.
Okay.
Then you got Florida State undefeated, Ohio State undefeated, Washington undefeated, and Texas 1 loss. So you got to kick what?
And Michigan 1 loss if that's your situation.
Well, Michigan's garbage if they have a loss. Their schedule. So undefeated Big Ten, undefeated ACC, undefeated Pac-12, a 1-loss Texas with a win at Alabama. You got to kick 1 or 2 out if you're putting Alabama or Georgia in.
There would be a civil war in this country. The SEC against everybody else, and the SEC with 1 loss.
I still think the SEC champion would get in that scenario, and I think much as we see the NCAA basketball tournament committee look at how a team is playing without a key player, there would be very close examination of what Texas continues to do without Quinn Ewers and how long is Quinn Ewers out. I know what the timeline is projected to be, but let's say we get to that first weekend of December and Quinn Ewers still has not returned, even though they guarantee he would be back for the playoffs. I think Texas is the odd man out in that scenario.
That would be wild.
I genuinely don't enjoy talking about college football rankings this early, but this has been so much fun.
Yeah.
Oh, the concept of SEC being left out is just delightful.
It's not going to happen, but it could. It could, and that's what's special about this season so far.
Zach bringing nuclear winter to the football scoop.
I love it. I love it. He's getting geared up for his annual greatness. We are the Football Scoop staff. This has been great fun. We could talk for hours, but we're going to cut it there. I'm Scott Russell. I got Coach Sam's up there at Zach_Barnett, John D. Bryce 1. You guys are wonderful. Everybody go have a great day, and let's enjoy the beauty that is college football.